Common law. These are all the different kinds of legal systems that we might be operating under. Let's look at each of them. Common law is also known as case law, based on jurisprudence. Jay, you had defined it earlier. Again, remind us, what is case law? What is common law?
Basically, where something has gone before a jury and a decision has been rendered. So
Good.
You have precedent.
Good. The court's already made a decision. Not necessarily just a jury. Could be a judge, too, depending on who set the precedent, who made the decision. Goes all the way back to British law in the 12th century, oddly enough. I got a friend who's going through law school right now, and she says, yeah, some of our property law in California is based on this archaic land holding, the feudal system all the way back in the UK. Very interesting. The problem with that, of course, is there's a whole bunch of it, so it's very hard to vindicate both sides, or it's very easy to vindicate both sides. Characteristics that are typical to common law are the adversarial approach, the prosecution and defense, or the litigants? No, what do you call it? Sorry. The prosecution or the defense actually present both sides of their case, or if it's tort law, it's the plaintiff or the defense are going to present both sides of their case, and they're going to try to fight it out. Adjudicated argumentation. Who's adjudicating? The judge. One of the jokes in the legal profession is the reasonable person test. Who's a reasonable person? The judge is a reasonable person. It can change dynamically depending on what case it is and in what court you're requesting a ruling. And again, all the rulings that come before bear on future rulings. In common law, we see these three branches of law. First of all is criminal law. It's when citizens or organizations do damages to something that could harm society in general, harmful to the public. The government serves as the prosecutor. There is no plaintiff per se. The government is the plaintiff. They are there to protect the public, and they are prosecuting the criminals. Punishments can go all the way up to death, in criminal law. Tort law is civil. It's usually citizen to citizen or organization to organization. The government usually doesn't play a role, other than, of course, being the court. The government doesn't have a stake in the outcome, per se. Damages in this case, mostly you're talking about monetary. It's very hard to find a death penalty ruling in a breach of contract decision. They can be legislated damages as well. If they meet certain thresholds, they can be determined by statute. Tort law goes back to criminal law. It's very similar. Again, you're going to have that adversarial approach as well. There's a bunch of categories of tort law, including intentional torts. What would an intentional tort be? Just like it sounds. Battery can often be an intentional tort. Slander, defamation, good. Wrongs against a person or property, again, just like they sound. Dignitary wrongs, economic wrongs, negligence, nuisance. Strict liability, meaning you are responsible for your actions no matter what. Administrative law is regulatory in nature. It is not legislated. It's not written as a statute. It is, however, assigned by a government agency, and it holds the force of law. Anyone think of an example of regulatory laws in this country that were not written as statutes, but we still have to adhere to? Environmental. Most environmental regulation is administrative in nature. The EPA outlines standards and says you will be in compliance with these. Some of it can be statutory, but most of it's regulatory. Drug laws in this country are mostly administrative. The DEA sets the schedule saying which substances are prohibited. Congress has granted these agencies that administrative capability. They created the DEA and said the DEA can make those regulations. They created the EPA and said the EPA can make those regulations. Okay? Usually not a death penalty associated with these. Usually it's a financial penalty. Maybe jail time. Maybe jail time. The government's interest in this activity is usually from a restrictive standpoint, and usually the court is trying to see how the government's reacting with the public as well, and confining that and constraining that as, down to the least level possible. Civil law. Other than that was our common law. Now we got civil law, and that is more governmental in nature. The government has a much larger role than in common law. Two major origins, Justinian Code and Napoleonic Code. A lot of it is by statute, not by case law. It's not by precedence. Mostly this is coming out of royalty, out of the aristocracy. There are decrees. This is the way it's going to be. This is the way the law is. Judges, in this case, actively do investigations. It's not an adversarial nature as much as it is in our common law system. In the civil law system, the judges are playing an active role. They already have a vested interest in the outcome. Customary law system. This is based much more in a culture. The social mores and norms are going to be used to govern the outcomes. Gabriel, in Cameroon, are the legal system, do they still use the committee? Is that still a way of resolving disputes?
Maybe in villages.
Okay, all right. Different than a centralized legal system?
Yeah.
Okay. In many African countries, that's the case, that there's mixed systems depending on the regional locale.
Yeah, it's a mixed system.
Yeah. That happened a lot in determining human rights violations in the Hutu and Tutsi cases. Afterwards, instead of being turned over to civil authorities in a centralized government and prosecuted that way, a lot of the progenitors of that violence were put up in front of these localized village committees. And those became the legal bodies that made legal decisions that held up in those cases, that actually were used to punish those people. Very, very few decisions that come down with death penalty or incarceration in these cases. Most customary law decisions involve some form of restitution. Can anyone think why that might be the case, especially in a tribal or village setting?
That's how it's always done way back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, these are some age-old tested systems. And quite often, all of those people know each other. You're going to have to live with those people again. You're talking about a small enough community where if you kill someone's brother, even if it's been decided by the committee that you're going to do it, now their brother's going to be upset, and you're going to create these age-old animosities to go along with those things as well. So you find a way for everybody to move forward instead of trying to administer a punishment that will be permanent. It's something much more of a cooperative methodology. Religious law. It's another system usually dictated by some code, some written documentation that said this is the power of the land that supervises what our activities and behavior should be. Usually there's no formalized, centralized authority. It's interpretive. Comes out of clergy who define what that text says. A lot of times the text can be arbitrary and ambiguous, and it's up to the particular clergy person to make that definition. Again, who's a reasonable person? The judge is a reasonable person. Punishments under religious laws, religious legal system, again, up to and including death. Nowadays, we see a lot of environments that have had customary law systems and religious law systems using a form of mixed legal systems where they're introducing a centralized authority. In many times, if it's a religious system, they're introducing a secular authority. In other times, if it's a regional legal system, they're looking at some centralized metropolitan authority. And the reasons for this can be couched in many different ways. Trading partners often influence things that have been done for a long time. Just because we've done it all this time, we look at our trading partner and we say, we kind of like the ideas you're bringing to us. Let's go in that direction. Sometimes trading partners mandate it. We're not going to do business with you unless you drop this practice and you do this instead. That happens as well, too. And political pressure, obviously. Okay, questions about the various types of legal systems? Excellent.